Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 5 of Days Gone By, the review series for Gran Turismo's pretty broad selection, and quite an eclectic mix as well, of classic cars, and also to some degree vintage cars, although there are remarkably few vintage cars featured on the game, and that's something which I personally sorely want to see more of, being as I am a huge fan of classic and vintage cars. The classics that we do have on the game, though, are, it has to be said, pretty good. There are many which are notable that are not included, but there are many notable cars that are included as well. And this particular episode is discussing a car which is one of my favourite classics in the game. It's the Marcos Mini Marcos. Now this is currently, and kind of unfortunately, the only Marcos vehicle featured in Gran Turismo. It's the only Marcos to have ever been included on Gran Turismo, and that's a real shame, because Marcos, like other companies such as Lotus and TVR, has a fantastic range of vehicles over their lineage, including road cars, race cars, and even some pretty impressive super sports cars. The car that we get on the game, though, is still a pretty good vehicle. There are many more which should be added, of course, but this car is a good one to have. Now, as the name suggests, it has a connection to Mini. It's actually very heavily based on a Mini. It shares the same engine, among other things, a 1275 coupe engine. Now, that engine isn't particularly powerful in its original form, but the Marcos is more sporty than the Mini, has a lower centre of gravity, is more aerodynamic, and is just more inclined towards racing than the Mini, even the Coupe Mini, is. Now, based on how successful a race car the Mini Cooper was, especially for rallying, that bodes pretty well for the Mini Marcos. And, funnily enough, it's probably the last car you'd expect to hear this about, but it actually took on the Le Mans 24-hour race. And not only did it take it on, but in the year that it entered, it was actually the only British car to finish the entire race. It didn't win, but even to finish the Le Mans 24-hour race is a feat in itself. Many modern companies, big companies, don't manage to finish the whole race. So for a classic car to manage that really says a lot about its reliability and endurance. Now, on the game, things like reliability don't matter that much. What really matters is usability and performance. So what do you get from the Mini Marcos? Because although it has a reasonably strong fan base, that fan base is quite small. Now, I include myself in that, although I don't use the car as much as I really should, given how much I love the car. But it is a potentially brilliant vehicle. It has some very distinct advantages, even among small sports cars of much, much later years. And the advantage for the Marcos, or one of the advantages, is that it is a classic. Many older classic cars have significant disadvantages in ways such as handling, drivability, and control. And those very same things are exactly what the Marcos is good at, just like the Mini. And in some cases, that can actually trump sheer power. So does it in the case of the Marcos? Well, that 1.3 litre engine, though naturally aspirated, can be tuned up to a pretty impressive 225 horsepower. Not breaking the bank, but certainly not bad, especially for an older engine. It also puts out, when fully tuned, 170 foot-pounds of torque, which doesn't sound like that much, but it doesn't really need to be, given that the car only weighs a seriously impressive 516 kilos. So this Mini Marcos is quite literally lighter than Ayrton Senna's Lotus Formula 1 car. That's pretty impressive. Now, it may only have 225 horsepower, but that is essentially putting the power of something like a hot hatch, such as a Megane or a Golf, into something that weighs less than a Formula 1 car. That's never going to be slow, and it's certainly not in the case of the Marcos. The PP is possibly the main downside, I would say, of this car, because it's a little bit too high for its own good. Now, I can understand why the PP is so high. It's kind of like the Suzuki GSX-R4 from yesterday's review, in that and also to some degree, incidentally, the Red Bull Junior, that the way they calculate the PP on the game is kind of flawed, because they seem to use an algorithm rather than actual common sense, because there are certain vehicles which just should not be as high as they are, because they're just not competitive enough at that level. The Red Bull Junior, in fact, has a PP almost at the same level as something like a Toyota 7 Can-Am car, but to even think of a notion that that could even come close to the Toyota 7 around any circuit is a ridiculous thought. So the PP system itself is, as far as I'm concerned, kind of a broken system on Gran Turismo. For most cars it works well, but just because it works with most doesn't mean it's good. It needs to work with all of them. And in the case of this car, I don't think it does work, because the PP of this vehicle when fully tuned is 547. Now that may not sound overly high, it's certainly not as bad as the Red Bull Junior, which is well over 700 PP, but still, that's too high. This car just isn't competitive enough at the 550 PP threshold. You can get some serious vehicles at that level, Cobras, GTRs, various other vehicles with serious caliber performance, not just for straight line speed, but also with handling that can match the Marcos. The whole point of the Marcos is that it has cornering ability that can outdo its peers and also cars with more power. Once you get up to that kind of level though, it just doesn't have the straight line performance to even keep up with those kind of cars, let alone beat them. So although it's impressive that its PP is that high, it's just not practical, and it should not be that high. All things considered though, the performance that you get is very good. The top speed is over 180 miles per hour, which is seriously good for a classic, and it only costs 25,000 credits, which is remarkable value. So if you're looking for, at the very least, an incredibly fun car, but also one that can potentially win races at lower PPs, check out the Marcos. But that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.